Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue Podcast. Today, I have a good buddy of mine, special guest, Craig Maiorana from Classic Industries. And Craig is going to tell us a little bit about, well, everything they do in the car industry. And their sole purpose is basically to make everything that we own look a hell of a lot better. How you doing, Craig?
Pretty good. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, man. You are sitting in front of some really, really nice iron. Where are you?
We are at one of our undisclosed locations where it kind of doubles as an overflow warehouse, and this is where we also keep most of our clean cars, our show cars.
Wow. So you have, I mean, I'm seeing a Challenger, a Charger 500, Duster, Box Novas, man. You have some serious hardware back there.
Absolutely. The cars that you see that are two-tone were all done on a TV show, so that's why there's a running paint scheme with them. They all wear the American Racing Salt Flat Special wheels and maroon and silver paint.
Oh, very, very cool. Well, I know Classic has been involved in so many different productions over the years. I mean, obviously you were involved in Road to Improvement with us, but you guys have just been one of the staples in the industry for automotive restoration. And as far as servicing the industry, it's been absolutely incredible. But I wanted to ask you a question. Like, you have the cars behind you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys, when it comes to products, right? How do you come up with the product? How do you identify the need? Is it people coming and saying, I need this, I need that, or do you try to anticipate it?
It's a combination of things, actually. We do take a good amount of feedback from the people that generally buy from us, and a lot of times too, some of us will hit the Facebook groups. And I asked, when we started with the Regals, that was one of the things, being a Grand National lover.
Yeah.
I wanted to make the stuff that people wanted. I know for a fact certain products needed to be made, because that line in general was one of those lines that just nobody ever really got off the ground. So even with our Camaro, which is our main line, we always still find little trinkets, little necessities that kind of get overlooked over the years. So it's a combination. We do take a lot of general feedback from the public, and a lot of times we go out there and look for that feedback, and we ask the questions: what do we need to make? What would satisfy the needs that you guys want?
So let me ask you this. So at Classic, how important is it being a car guy? How important is it to live the hobby that we all love? Is that a prerequisite for coming in? Or like, do you have people be like, yeah, I'd really like to work here, this is great. Then you go, well, how many cars do you own, or what do you own? And they go, well, then you're like, nah, you're done. Like, how does that work?
For me, it is. I mean, for me, this was kind of a transition that I had always kind of hoped to get to after wrenching on cars for so long. Hands are just not what they used to be.
Sure.
So for me to get into this aspect of the business was really great, because now I can, not only have I built cars for a long time, but I have a better understanding of what it takes to build them,
right,
and what parts are necessities. So for me, it definitely was a prerequisite, and I kind of think it was an evolution for me to eventually get to this point.
Okay. So how do you, all right, you're talking about the Regal line, right? Grand National, G-bodies, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, now that, from the hot rod perspective, G-bodies have always been there, right? We're talking about Grand Nationals, Regals, Monte Carlos, things like that.
Yeah.
It is a line that, from the hot rodder perspective, was always there, but like you said, was very kind of overlooked. When did you guys start getting hit up for kind of like the 80s cars and the 90s cars? How long ago was that?
Well, we've been into the Regal line now for, I think, roughly about 4 or 5 years, but we noticed a progression throughout the other lines, especially Camaro. Camaro and Firebird really were the predecessor that kind of led us into the evolution of doing the 80s cars, because the third gen Camaros and Firebirds had gotten to a point where they're very sought after. I mean, I go to local car shows, and there's people bragging that this is my '86 IROC that I just sold. As odd as it sounds, because Grand National guys are so into their cars, we have to expect it from other lines. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Everyone has that niche that they love.
Right.
And with the Regal line, it kind of languished because everybody assumes Regals are grandma cars,
Mhm.
except for the black ones that'll sneak up on you. Yeah.
Right.
It is and I say this being the age of 46, it's my generation's A body. It's my generation's Chevelle, realistically.
Yep. Yep.
And granted, it is a progressive change from the A body. So you have cars like the Cutlass and everything, which are G bodies now, and they came from A bodies. So
Yep.
obviously, it was bound to happen.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, so when you recognize you see a need for a part, right? Whether you're on the forums or you're at shows and you're talking to customers out there and saying, will you go up to somebody with a Regal or any type of classic car and say, what are you looking for? Like what don't you see in the industry? Like how do you do your product research? Is it really talking to customers? Do you guys really get in deep with that?
I think that is where the best responses come from, because these are the guys that are spending money with your business. So you want their feedback, and when kind of like the show that we were all just at, the muscle cars at the Strip, that was a good place
Yeah.
to really dig in, because a lot of the attendees were the guys that we talked to, and
Right.
a lot of these guys, once you develop a friendly conversation with them, I want to know their feedback, and
Right.
it's a lot of these people are very very accommodating. They some of them, I've even had guys break out lists and say, well, I need this, I need this, I need this. The honesty of it all is really what keeps us pushing forward.
Right. Okay, so now you go to a show, you identify the need for, say, a certain part, right? I'm a Charger guy, obviously, so I'm going to throw that right there, and you got one behind you. So say 68 Charger grills, right? Like I have had a 68 Charger grill hanging in my garage for 15 years because up until very recently, they were unobtainium, right? So I have been lugging this thing around for 15 years going, well, maybe one day. Now you guys have one. And it's beautiful. So how does that process work? You say, okay, I've identified the need. This is the part that we want. Walk us through kind of the manufacturing part of it. Like how does that take shape?
We kind of attacked all 3 years, the 68, 69, and 70 at once. And what we did was we brought up what we could get. We bought a lot of crusty grills that were just ready to fall apart. But we got as many good samples to start as we could.
Okay.
And the main thing was the 68 and 69 grill actually fits into a cage. So what we did was
correct.
We got a very nicely restored cage to start as our test bed. And that mounted to a table for 3.5 years. And what I would do is every time I got my samples back, I would put them back into this restored cage.
Wow.
You don't necessarily need a car to do it. With the 70,
sure.
The 70, I had one of my test cars jacked up for almost 4 years with the front end on jack stands, because it's similar to the 68 and 69, but different in the aspect where it had in the car.
Right.
And every time I got my new samples, I would just go back to that. I would go back to that cage and test in that cage. What we do is we photograph. We take it to an editing program where we can add details and add explanations in the program.
Right.
Because a lot of our vendors are very unfamiliar with the piece that they're making. They know it's a part. They don't necessarily know how it works with a car. So you always have to explain that to your vendors and show them what needs to be adjusted. So we use a paint program to go in and just highlight certain things and each time you want to highlight the positives. You want to make sure that they know that this piece, all right, now we're good with this part. We can move on to the next identifiable issue. And you just have to nitpick it in some of these processes. I mean, the Charger grills was almost a 5-year process because I was doing all three at once.
Wow. So yeah, I don't think anybody has any idea that it takes that long to bring a part like that intricate to market. I had no idea it took that long.
And there were other companies that were making them. And you really, when you do this stuff, you don't necessarily want to make a copy of a copy. I would rather start
Right.
with an original grill, no matter how dilapidated or falling apart it was, it's still an original
Yeah.
base. And then we build off of
Right.
that.
So is that process, does the process mimic itself, whether it's a grill or a door latch or a gauge cluster, like a gauge surround? Is the process pretty much the same where it's okay, let's find, some of the best pieces we can, photograph them, put them in CAD, send them to the manufacturer, and then with the whole sample process, how many times does a manufacturer send you back samples and you're like, oh, do it again?
Yeah, I have a lot of samples that are kind of the process. The steps to the process are definitely the same. The Charger grill was probably one of the bigger undertakings we've done as far as
Right.
size of the product we're building, but
Uh-huh.
steps we take are always the same. You you always want to, like I said, accentuate the positives of it and build on it.
Right.
You tell them what can be adjusted, and you really want to go about it politely.
Sure. Yeah, right. Gotcha.
So I always have to. I feel like I always have to explain classic cars to people. So my explanation of things has gotten a lot better over the years.
Okay.
Even my dad, when I start breaking things down to him, he kind of he shakes his head, and he's an accountant.
Right. Is the process, from start to finish, when you identify that part, that you're going to reproduce, is the process enjoyable? Like, do you enjoy the whole going through it from start to finish?
When I start seeing progress, then it starts to get enjoyable. When you feel like you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you start getting your samples start to get better and better and better to the point where you really can't distinguish your sample from a production run. That's when because that the stuff that people have asked you about is only a few months from hitting the market.
Right.
And then
okay.
Monitor it too. And I like to see the feedback. I like to see how many people get excited about it and how many people try to knock it down. Because there's always, there's two sides to every coin. So
Of course. So that right now, where are you seeing? Because obviously, 60s and 70s muscle cars have been in vogue forever. They're not going anywhere, right? But now we're talking about 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s. Like, to see a fourth gen, like, what's really cool, and you and I are very close in age. So, like, we grew up with G bodies. We grew up with IROCs. We grew up with LS1 powered Camaros, right?
Yeah.
So those are like the classic cars of our youth, right? And especially being from the East Coast, both of us, it's like they were freaking everywhere. So like that is like when everybody, when people talk about IROCs, I'm like, that's the official car of New York, as far as I'm concerned, right?
Or Seaside.
Or Seaside, right? So to have those cars now come kind of full circle, and people are starting to restore them again. And to me, that's wild, because like forever you would look for an original car because that's all that was out there. Are you seeing that need for those late 80s Camaros, those early 90s Camaros, where, because most have been driven so hard and put away wet. And it's like, man,
I think a lot of the 90s Camaros kind of follow the same path that a lot of the Fox bodies do. A lot of them are chosen. I mean, between the F body and the Fox body, those are very popular with the drag race crowd. You know what I mean? A lot of these cars are spend a lot of their time on the drag strips now. I mean, I go to some races and realistically, it's Fox body, F body, Fox body, F body. So
sure,
there is a huge demand for them. There's a huge amount of popularity in them. So it's it was one of those things that was bound to happen. The only problem with cars with the late 80s and 90s is there's a lot of plastic. So a lot of the plastic gets very heat soaked. So that's one of the things we try and attack first, because it's a needed part, and after a while, this stuff just crumbles.
Right. Well, that's very true. I mean, I know just from my own personal experience, right? If you're talking about a GM from the 80s or the early 90s, if that car was left outside, the plastic, it turns into like ramen noodles. Like you pick it up and it just crumbles in your fingers and you're like, wait, I need this. This can't crumble apart. Right.
That's where it presents a challenge for us to even get samples. We deal with that a lot with the late 70s and late 70s Novas, are really subject to plastic rot. And it's unfortunately a lot of their interiors are 90% plastic. So that's
right.
it does present a challenge for us to get samples because of that.
Okay, so say if you get a sample, right, and it just happens to be a really good sample right now, okay, is the plastics that are out now that the samples are made in, that the final product, are they that much better than what was originally put on the car 30, 40 years ago?
Yes, in the sense that we can kind of combat some of that plastic rot. It stands up a little bit better to the UV abuse, and doesn't necessarily turn to dust as fast as some of the stuff did.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say dust, because anybody that's had like, an old school GM literally knows that the door panels turn to dust. I mean, they just do. It's like God forbid you have a watch on and you rub your watch on it, and all of a sudden dust, and you're like, wait a minute, this can't happen.
Well, that was something that we had experienced with the Suburban too.
That's correct. Yeah, when we pulled in, and you guys will see it in the episode, the episode that we do with Classic Industries, the original door panels on that car were literally dust. Like you would touch it and they would just crumble.
Yep.
And it's that's a tough one, because like as much as you want to keep stuff original, there are times when you simply can't, because it's just, again, you're talking about vehicles that are 40, 50 years old. It just disintegrates over time.
Yeah.
Right. Where the cars and the vehicles and everything else might have been made of metal, there's a lot of interior parts that are not. They are plastic. They crack. They wear out. And I think, to your point, Craig, people don't consider like UV rays that just absolutely dry out and destroy things.
I think a lot of these cars probably would have fared better if everybody had, tinted everything but the driver's window. Like we noticed on the Suburban, it almost, you start to get down layers like a gobstopper.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know what? That's very, very true. The parts that are exposed, like the dash pad, like what you guys supplied, which was a fantastic piece. Just you'd be surprised at how little you have to do to bring a vehicle back up to something that you look at and that you're proud of. Right.
Well, even with the rear door panels on the Suburban, we managed to get them somewhat, I guess, ready for the ball with just a little rubbing and some paint. So, sometimes a little bit of elbow grease will do you right, but in certain situations you may have to replace the stuff too.
Well, that's another thing that we should talk about, right? Because a lot of times you don't have to replace, right? So to Craig's point, so the front door panels were jacked. I mean, they were pretty messed up. The rear door panels were still kind of jacked, but salvageable. And do you think a lot of people out there understand that they can refurbish and respray and re-dye things like door panels or vinyl or things like that?
I think to a lot of guys that are mechanics and car guys, they realize that they can do this. The general public, not so much, because a lot of these guys are very gun shy when they touch their cars. They don't realize what they truly are capable of until they sit down and do it and try it. And I just think a lot of people need to get over that hump and realize that there is nothing you can do to a car that can't be fixed. So if you have a hankering to restore a car, give it a go, give it a shot.
Yeah, and I think that's extremely sound advice. I know when I first got started in the hobby, that was me. Like I would I was terrified to do anything because I'm like, I'm gonna break it. And then, don't get me wrong, I still break stuff, but like I'm not gun shy anymore. I do, yeah, exactly. But now the idea of pulling a door panel off and going to like the Classic Industry site, finding the right product, looking up a couple of YouTube videos of how to properly sand stuff, what grit sandpaper to use, and then like you guys gave us the primer and you gave us the color match paint for it, and it's shocking that literally in half an afternoon you can refurbish things that you might have never thought possible, and the results are fantastic. The results are absolutely fantastic.
I mean, if you look at the time that we spent on the Suburban, which was probably a total like maybe 10 hours, the night and day difference was really stark.
Oh my God. Oh, the cabin was transformed.
Yeah. So it's, all it takes really is if you're willing to put the time and energy in, the possibilities are endless. That's the kind of thinking that we try and keep pushing. And
Yeah.
that's what keeps it. That's what keeps us going back to the well to make new parts, because every year there's new people getting involved in this hobby of ours. This thing of ours.
Right.
And it's just something that as long as there's people that are ready to take on these challenges, then we'll just keep pushing parts. That's what we do. We're in the business of making cars look better.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you this, Craig. Do you find yourselves now, again, we've kind of talked about the 80s and 90s cars. Do you try to anticipate what's going to be the next trend in the automotive industry? So like we know now that, like we were talking about F bodies, right? Like 90s F bodies, Trans Ams and Camaros, things like that. Obviously the truck market has completely exploded all over the wall, right? I mean, that's massive. But do you guys try to anticipate that? Like, will you look and say, okay, you know what? I have a feeling that this is going to pop. Or is that difficult and I guess just expensive to do? Because that's a big gamble.
No, not necessarily. Guys like me, I've always watched the auctions. I kind of grew up watching the auctions, and I've always learned that whatever the hot seller is at the auction is really kind of the way the market sways. It really kind of dictates what's going to happen for the year. I watch Meekum and I watch Barrett Jackson.
Sure.
Barrett Jackson's a little bit far-fetched, but Meekum is a little bit more realistic. And like we noticed that a couple of years ago, silver anniversary Trans Ams were starting to go wild. They were starting to pull six figures. Yeah. It was just not something we ever thought we'd see, especially over the Camaro. And,
sure.
And lo and behold, that year we saw a severe jump in late second gen Firebirds. So there is some truth to following the auctions. Granted, the prices usually get crazy, but it kind of manipulates the trends.
Gotcha. Okay.
And SEMA has a hand in that too, because I feel like a lot of guys, they try and pick stuff for SEMA that you don't see all the time.
Yeah.
So, I remember a couple of years ago, there was an LS powered third gen IROC, and the car was a knockout, and it sounded like an absolute monster. But it was just, again, nobody ever looks at these cars and says, oh yeah, I'm going to nowadays, obviously, you can put an LS in anything and make it a monster.
Right. Sure.
But it's, like I said, the trends are very noticeable. And if you know where to pay attention, you can see the sways.
Gotcha. Okay. Very, very cool. So let me ask you, what is Classic Industries like? What's your biggest seller? Is it more cars or more trucks?
It's always going to be Camaro. Camaro is always our top dog. It's what this company was founded on. And it's just something that really, it drives us. But it's allowed us to delve into more stuff. Now, we just recently got into Ford. We've been in the Dodge market for, I would say, roughly about 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and our Dodge book went from, the size of a Mad magazine to now it's almost as thick as a poem book.
Oh, believe me, as a Dodge guy, like when I first started, and this was back 2001 or so, I couldn't get anything. Mm-hmm. Nobody in the aftermarket community supported Mopar. And it didn't matter whether you wanted a dash bezel or a window crank, there were no parts whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it was crazy because like you'd go to a swap meet and there'd be like a door panel and the guy'd be like, I want $300. And you're like, what, are you out of your mind? But you didn't have a choice. And now, because of you guys, like we have a choice now, like we can actually go out and get these parts. So from a restoration standpoint, as an enthusiast, it makes our lives so much easier that you guys are offering that. So I'm going to thank you out of the gate because you've made my life a hell of a lot easier. I'll tell you that.
Well, you're welcome, Mike. I'm glad we could help.
So what is next for Classic? What are you guys working on now?
Well, now that we've kind of really established a foothold with Mustang, we want to expand on the Ford aspect of things. We want to dive into a little bit of the Ford trucks. We're hoping to get into Falcon and Torinos, and Falcon mainly because it's so closely related to Mustang. Okay. And Southern California is drenched in Falcons. They're everywhere.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere. Yep.
So it's a good line, and it'd be something that I think we can really build on. And I do believe we're looking into maybe possibly getting into Dodge truck as well, like some of the earlier stuff,
Very,
like
very cool.
Little Red Wagon era.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Well, and we're, you know what, we're starting to see more and more of that. I mean, when you talk about trucks, right? Chevy C10 kind of reigns supreme, right? Then you have Ford F-Series, and then Dodge, like, like an A100 or a Little Red or Warlocks or stuff like, those are, again, I personally think they're some of the best looking trucks, but aftermarket support, there's nothing. So to come out for a line that addresses that, my God, the community would just be loving you guys.
I agree, and there's a big hole there that just kind of gets danced around. Is because they're so utilitarian. They were trucks were never really meant to be hot rodded until you got some factory support, like with the Little Red Wagon or the Warlock, which I prefer. I think is a cooler looking truck.
Yeah.
But until then, they were just work trucks, and they were treated as such. They were put out to pasture as such.
Correct. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, are you, because this time is boogieing. Are you guys going to SEMA? If not, where could people find Classic? And like, give me all of your go-tos where people can find Classic Industries, where they can make comments, where they can view your product and do some research. What's the best place to go?
Well, we have a YouTube channel, we have a Facebook page, we have a constant Instagram updates. So any of the social media, we're there and we're on it. And typically, if we're at a car show, we let people know through the social media, since that is the most easiest way to connect these days. But realistically, if you go on to YouTube, the comment sections are open. We monitor it. We also monitor our Facebook page pretty heavily. So that's a good place. Even if it's a picture of another car, if you have a suggestion, drop it on there. We read our messages. We catch the messenger. We are definitely an open access company. We listen to the people. We interact with the people quite frequently. It's not really hard to get your message across to us.
And I mean, we obviously worked with Classic. We worked with Craig and Gabe on Big Green when we spent the day there, which you guys will soon see. But I can attest to that. Also, having been to, I don't know how many billions of shows, when they're there, ask the questions that you want answers to, because I've always found that you will get the right information. And even better than that, if they don't have the answer on site, they'll find the answer for you, which is really great. Like, a lot of companies will just go, yeah, we don't have that, or we don't know. But I've always gotten like, well, do you have it? I don't, you know what? Let me check. And a lot of times you'll walk away and you'll never hear from them again. That's not the case. That is not the case. I've always gotten that callback, which is great.
One instance in to kind of back that up is when we were at the muscle cars at the Strip. I had a guy come up and he was asking about a certain part on a convertible E-body. I said, if you give me about 5-10 minutes to finish doing what I'm doing, I said, I'll walk over to one of the cars at the show here. You can show me exactly what it is you're looking for, and we can come back to the table and go through the books and see what I can find. And I always give out my card, and I always take emails. And I've gotten a good amount of feedback from the match show of just people that wanted to come up and say hello. And I've gotten a good amount of before and after photos just because they are so proud of their car that they wanted to show us. Yeah. And that's for me, that's the end goal. When somebody can come up to me and say, I got this car out of a barn and this such and such a part was just wasted. I had no problems with your parts. This is the end result. That's my end goal, is to see that end photo.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. So here's the thing, guys. If you are at a show and you see the guys from Classic, go up and talk, because the fact is, like, Craig, Gabe, everybody there, they're all car guys. He's not sitting in front of a bunch of like garbage. The cars that you see behind him are pretty spectacular. And I know that because I've actually seen a few of them in person, and I'm like, can I have this? And they just look at me and go, no. But I mean, the fact of the matter is the parts that they offer can really, really help bring your car back to its former glory, if that's your intention. But also don't overlook restoring the parts that you already have, because so many of the products that they have, and I'm going to throw this out there too. So many of the products that they have help you with that. But one thing that you're not going to see on the episode, because we did after the fact, was that when we had stopped by Classic, we didn't have a headliner in the Suburban. And later on, we wanted to do that because we had to take the truck into Las Vegas and it was 1,000,000 degrees. And so I called up Craig and Gabe and I said, guys, what do you have for this? So not only did we have this thermal insulation that we put on the top of the Suburban that literally dropped the interior temp by 40 degrees, which is insane, but this gorgeous headliner that's in there now. And the crazy part is you would never know it wasn't a factory piece. And that really helps transform stuff. So we look at it now, like even my wife, like for my wife to get in that truck and be like, this is really nice. That's a big thing. Guys, if you want your others to get in these things and enjoy them, make them nice. Make them nice. So, And
I think a lot of times too, people sit back and they question whether or not certain cars are worth restoring. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you have any memories wrapped up in the car, or if you have any good times attached to the car, then it is worth restoring, because otherwise you're sweeping those memories to the side. I feel like if you don't give it a shot, you're just kind of missing the boat. You at least make an attempt. And another thing too, I don't mind negative feedback. So when you see me at a show, if you have a question or concern, I want to know that too.
That's great, because a lot of companies just, they don't want to hear that, but I know that you guys do take it to heart, because that's your customer base, right? If something doesn't work the proper way, you have to know, otherwise you can't correct it. So
and that real world feedback translates to how I'm going to either have the vendor fix it, or how I'm going to move on to the next product as well too.
Exactly. Well, Craig, dude, thank you for coming on the Hot Rod Barbecue. It is always good to hang out, man. Always, always, always. You know that. Are you going to have a SEMA presence? You think you guys will be walking around a little bit, or is that yet to be determined?
We, as a company, have vacated for this year, only because we feel like there is going to be kind of a reduced presence with the whole COVID thing. And not only that, we don't really want to risk any of our employees getting sick. And I feel like SEMA is a very handshake kind of business deal.
It is
venue. It is. And I don't feel like doing this. To me, it kind of takes the personability out of it. It's just, you're not really dealing face to face. You're talking through a mask. So and I'd kind of hope for next year, when this is all over with, maybe.
I'm all down with that. And so just because they're not there, that doesn't mean you can't ask questions. So do what Craig said, go to all the social media, go to Instagram, go to Facebook, go to wherever, go to classicindustries.com, ask questions about the parts that you want for your car, because I can guarantee you from my own personal experience, you will get the right answers to your questions. So Craig, buddy, again, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to talk to you and see you.
Definitely, Mike. Thank you for having me.
We will, of course, and we will be seeing you very soon.
All right, brother.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.